were the ones who least wanted to disrupt good relations with Britain over it. They figured, look, one way or another, we will work this out once Britain stops going to war with France. And that's basically what happened. It had nothing to do with the War of 1812. The British stopped its war, defeated France, and so they stopped harassing the U.S., and that's what New England predicted would happen. But what they feared was that this embargo would have no actual effect other than ruining their economies, which is exactly what happened.
Now, I got to tell you, Thomas, if the listener is out there and he's saying, boy, this sounds really good, but this is a pipe dream, let me give you the good news. As Thomas points out, right now we got Virginia, Idaho, Utah, Tennessee, 32 other states right now, maybe more since this release, are fighting the federal health care law.
Right.
Arizona protecting its borders. Washington State, Oklahoma, Tennessee fighting cap and trade, and they're all using the constitutional tool of nullification. Now, how is nullification and the 10th Amendment, are they both one and one, or are they different? How's that work?
I think one follows from the other. The 10th Amendment, I'm sure your listeners already know what the 10th Amendment is, but just in case somebody's coming at this randomly, let's just say the 10th Amendment says the federal government has only the powers that are delegated to it in the Constitution, and anything that's not mentioned in the Constitution remains with the states. That's the whole idea behind the U.S., is that we are a collection of self-governing communities. So that's the 10th Amendment, and Jefferson's argument was that what follows from that is that if the federal government tries to reach for an additional power, then you can't allow it to exercise that power. The 10th Amendment won't allow it. And in fact, Jefferson didn't just wake up drunk one morning and come up with this idea. We should point out that Virginia, when they were given the choice, do you want to ratify the Constitution or not, back in 1788, a lot of them were very skeptical. They were afraid this government was going to get out of control, it would get too big. And so supporters of the Constitution assured them, don't worry, this government's going to have only the powers expressly delegated to it, and if it tries to exercise any additional power, don't worry. Virginia will be exonerated. We simply point to that power and say, wait a minute, we never delegated that power to you, and we won't have to enforce it. So Virginia went into the Union on the express understanding that they would have a right to nullify unconstitutional laws. This is not something that I made up in 2010 or Thomas Jefferson made up in 1798. It is part of American history, albeit part that you will not get in a typical American history textbook. You're more likely to read in an American history textbook that I'm the King of England than you are any of this stuff.
Now, and you're saying that nullification is the moderate middle ground. In other words, a state doesn't have to succeed because they're PO'd at the government, that this is a way you remain part of the United States of America, but you get your job done, so to speak.
Exactly. That's how Jefferson viewed it, was that there were two extremes that he wanted to avoid. I mean, he believed that there was a right of secession, but he didn't think it should be exercised frivolously. So secession was one extreme, leaving the Union, and the other extreme was just giving in, submission to an unconstitutional law. Well, that's another extreme. Surely there's some moderate position between them, and his view was you stay in the Union, but you resist violations of the Constitution. And his view was that if you let the federal government monopolize interpreting the Constitution, if the federal government gets to say what its powers are, we have no right to be surprised when it keeps discovering new ones every day.
And in your book, you're saying that in November 1799, Kentucky approved follow-up resolutions to the famous revolutions of the previous year, and basically the reason I'm bringing this up is that here for the first time the word nullification was employed in an official document.
That's right. Jefferson had introduced the term nullification the year earlier in a document that he presented to the Kentucky legislature, and they were a little skittish about it, so they took the word out, but they kept the idea. The next year, they finally were ticked off enough to keep the word.
That was the Kentucky Resolutions 1798?
No, 1798. Those are the famous ones. But Jefferson had included in his draft the word nullification. And he said, a nullification is the rightful remedy. A nullification of these unconstitutional laws is the rightful remedy. And for decades and decades afterward, people referred to these ideas as the principles of 98, after the year 1798. For at least 60 years, they were appealed to, they were used by the states to warn the federal government to back off. This was the great unique contribution the U.S. made to the world, is the idea of federalism, that we have local self-government, under the umbrella of a central government for the sake of common defense. And so, whereas today we've got a central government that does everything, and so now we're basically just like France or England or
right.
Germany. But that's not what we were supposed to be. We were supposed to be unique, and unfortunately that uniqueness, we've been deprived of it completely.
Now, we're coming up on a break here, Thomas, and we'll continue in just a moment. And we're going to talk about, you know, the federal government's power grabs. And most importantly, we're going to talk about the Supreme Court and what this book will tell you and what nullification will tell you when it comes to the Supreme Court. Speaking with Thomas E. Woods, Jr., he's the author of the just-released yesterday book, Nullification, How to Resist Federal Tyranny in the 21st Century. There it is, and it's thomasewoods.com. thomasewoods.com. Be right back.
This is a special alert to all Americans who own a vehicle with less than 120,000 miles with an auto warranty about to expire or no warranty coverage at all. Due to a decline in the economy and major car companies filing for bankruptcy, Cover America Auto Care has announced revolutionary, inexpensive mechanical breakdown coverage